welcome. Good morning. My name is Lindsey McDonald. I am the Chief Executive of Magic Breakfast and delighted that you can join us, especially today. It is World Teachers' Day, and I don't think there could be a more appropriate way to kick things off than sharing the incredible impact of school breakfast provision, which is going to be highlighted through our monitoring and measuring survey. And I also think that all of our speakers, Catherine Millar from Magic Breakfast, our education and engagement lead, Ellie Liddle, poverty proofing coordinator from a brilliant charity, Children Northeast, that you'll hear a bit more about, and Gareth Nation, who is the head of Minerva Primary School in Somerset, all have either backgrounds or continue to work in education and schools. So a particular happy World Teachers' Day to them and to all of the teachers and former teachers who are joining us today and who are making a contribution to children's education. So I think just to do the housekeeping, if you do require the captions, then you can enable those at the bottom of your screen with the show captions. I'm not sure how it actually picks up on my quasi-Canadian accent, but hopefully you can still follow along for the most part. To let you know that we are recording this morning's session, and we'll share a copy of that recording in a week or so. Immediately after the session, and I'll remind you about this at the end, we will be asking you to complete a short survey, and we do very much take that feedback on board, use it to drive and inform future Magic Mornings and Magic Breakfast events. And what I would love to encourage as well, because these sessions are always most interesting from not just the information that's shared, but the questions that are asked by people who join us. So you can see at the bottom of your screen, there is a Q&A button. Please do add in your questions as we go along. And then at the end of the 3 presentations, we'll come back to them. So don't worry about hanging on to them in your head at the start of the day. Pop them into the Q&A box there, and we will pick them up as we go. So we have brilliant presentations, and we are, as always, quite tight on time. So I will not take any more time up. I'd love to introduce Catherine Millar, who, as I mentioned, is one of our wonderful team members here at Magic Breakfast. And Catherine leads on our education and engagement work. So she works with all of our engagement partners and enables the resources and the support and the connections that we have with all of our schools and beyond, with other organizations as well. And she's going to be sharing this year's monitoring and measuring survey results. So Catherine, I'll welcome you to the screen, please.
Good morning. Thank you, Lindsay, for that warm welcome. And I didn't actually know it's World Teacher Day. I did know it's Census Day for schools, when government will be taking collecting data from schools. So there you go, another top random tip for you. A huge thank you to everybody for being here today and generally ongoing for supporting our work. We're really grateful, and hopefully you'll come away today with an understanding of why we're needed, the difference that all of us make together, and hopefully you'll all have fire in your bellies to continue to ensure that no child is too hungry to learn. And as Lindsay said, I'm Catherine Millar, I'm Magic Breakfast Education and Engagement Lead. We've been running our measuring and monitoring survey for 10 years. We survey all of our partner schools at the end of each academic year, and completing it is part of our terms and conditions for our partner schools, so it is taken seriously by them. Our engagement partners do a brilliant job. They always do a brilliant job, but in this context, they encourage completion and they explain to our partner schools how to collect data that's accurate and useful for us. We've built up a really good understanding of the broader context that our partner schools operate in over that time. And our M&M survey provides us with some rich data and helps us understand the challenges faced by our children and young people and their communities. The information that we're sharing today is confidential until next week, as Lindsay said, so please do keep it under wraps for now, but it is really exciting to share a sneak peek with you. And when you see it on socials, when it's launched, please do feel free to share away. I'm going to be talking about some sensitive issues, but it's always really heartening to see how Magic Breakfast and our partners are part of the solution for our families. There are around 200,000 students in the schools that we support across England and Scotland, and these are just a few of the quotes that we collected from our M&M this year. I think my favourite's the one from Kirklees. If breakfast club weren't there, I'd not get up, I'm out to eat and Alice be late for school. And then porridge as well. Children are being exposed to really filling, nutritious foods that they've never eaten before. So thank you, Quaker. I'm going to talk about Kyle this morning, a generic student who he could be in any of our schools. Kyle's based on all of the stories and all of the statistics that we see, and everything that I say about Kyle this morning comes from this year's M&M Survey. And I just wanted to humanize the data. We always like to bring our focus back to the hungry child. It's such a great motivator. I picked the name Kyle because I taught for over 15 years, and Kyle was one of the many children who, with hindsight, I now know was very likely hungry, and whose behavior, interest in behavior and learning were impacted by that hunger. I wish that I'd known throughout my teaching career about the impact that breakfast has. On to the next slide, please. Thank you. You'll have read in your invitation that 81% of Magic Breakfast partner schools that were surveyed believe that child hunger has increased in their school community in the past year. And in 2022, it was 81% of schools as well. This year in Scotland, it was 93% of our schools believe that child hunger has increased. I need to just add the caveat that we support a smaller amount of schools in Scotland across the central belt, so that number is less statistically significant. And I think we can probably all hazard a guess at the question why. I think unsurprisingly, onto the next slide, please. The cost of living crisis is seen as the main driver. So 99% of our schools said that the main driver of increased hunger and or poverty in their communities was the cost of living crisis. It's also worth noting it's not the only driver, and that our schools face other significant challenges too. This has obviously impacted us at Magic Breakfast, as food and fuel are our biggest outgoings. Last year, we had to make efficiencies and streamline our internal processes, and I think for the better. And I'll talk a bit more about how it's helped us increase our services later. We know from what schools have told us that the cost of living crisis hasn't just impacted school budgets. The external support services continue to shrink, and schools are doing even more with even less. We find this every year, that schools tell us it's the hardest it's ever been. And it's really true. They say one year, this is the hardest it's ever been. And the next year, it's even harder than last year. On to the next slide, please. Over half of our respondent schools cited that they'd had increased demand for food aid. So many of our schools are providing food vouchers, food bank referrals, food parcels, or even running food banks in schools. That's just over half of our schools. Just under half said that demand for uniform had increased significantly. Many schools are now providing free uniform, and pupils are arriving, they're seeing pupils arriving in ill-fitting and dirty uniform. This is obviously impacting children's and young people's mental health and well-being. And other common impacts observed include increased demand for support from school in the form of free school meals or referral to early help or local schemes. They are seeing decreased attendance, more hunger, more demand for breakfast, more demand for lunch. So packed lunches are diminishing, and parents are less able to pay for their lunch. Schools are seeing worse behaviour, and particularly in London, we saw that schools were reporting more children are living in temporary accommodation. So what does this mean for Kyle? On to the next slide, please. Put simply, Kyle is hungrier, dirtier and shabbier than last year. His attendance has dropped. Last year, his family were choosing between heating or eating. Now they're struggling to do either of those. Schools told us that his family's priorities are shifting to meet basic needs. His parents are stressed, which creates an uncomfortable atmosphere in his home, and schools are telling us that domestic abuse seems to be on the rise. Kyle's arriving at school tired, hungry, and unhappy. Schools are telling us that the poor are poorer, and all opportunities for development, their extracurricular enrichment, they've closed. Kyle's no longer experiencing cultural experiences outside his area. His packed lunch has deteriorated in quality. He's eating little to no fruit. Kyle has less energy, understandably. He's less able to concentrate. His academic attainment and his progress at school have been impacted. He's got no access to internet or mobile devices at home, but he's too embarrassed to tell school this, so he feels ashamed when he misses his homework. His school budget is in deficit, so he no longer has a teaching assistant in his class, and his teacher is more stressed. And it's not just Kyle who his teachers worry about. On average, in our schools, more than half of his class are also at risk of hunger. On to the next slide, please. So this brings me on to the wider challenges schools are facing. Schools always tell us about budget deficits, but this year the number of schools talking about school budget deficits was phenomenal. Half of the pay increase for staff, which is welcomed by staff struggling with cost of living crisis themselves, has to come from school budgets. The DfE's funding half of it. Cuts to other services mean the backlog in increase of children and young people needing help post-COVID still is an impact, whether it's with mental health support or through assessments of special educational needs. A number of years ago, when Michael Gove was the Education Secretary, he changed the SEN budget arrangement, so the first £6,000 has to come from school budgets. Falling roles impact schools because funding is allocated on a per pupil basis. Mobility further impacts budgets because the allocation is set on census day today. I hope Kyle's at school today, so he's counted as attending. But if new pupils arrive after the census, the school won't receive extra funding for them. And we heard refugees are impacting our schools as well. Safeguarding is taking more and more time. Earlier this year, as the NSPCC highlighted in their annual conference, poverty is a risk factor for children at risk of various types of abuse. And with a pupil premium percentage of 49% in our partner schools, it's way above the national average. On to the next slide, please. So this background context, as awful as the situation is on the ground, it's so helpful for us all to know. It helps us keep living our Magic Breakfast values, and it helps us keep the hungry child at the heart of all we do. Life is really hard for Kyle in 2023. I'm going to tell you about the impact that schools have reported and how we have all helped transform outcomes for him. On to the next page, please. So this is what Kyle says breakfast means to him. I'm going to tell you about a few other children too. One child that we heard about, he was continually late for school and was falling behind, particularly in phonics, which was the first lesson of the day. School spoke to his family, offered breakfast provision. He now arrives early at 8:15, has a good breakfast. He's made good progress, and yay, he's just passed the national phonics test. It always boggles my brain a bit that the solution to children being late is to get them to arrive earlier, but we hear that over and over again, that some parents have a 9 a.m. problem. So another school said they had a mum who struggles with depression, and removing the job of feeding the children before school has meant that her 4 girls who are persistently late now come to school on time. We heard of a child whose attendance was below 50%, and it has started attending Breakfast Club, and their attendance is now over 95% for last term. That's staggering. And attendance is important. Research shows there's a direct correlation between attendance and school outcomes. These are just some of the stories that we've heard. The impact data as a whole is staggering. Can we look at the next slide, please? Here we go. 96% of our schools say concentration has improved. Pupils are now able to sustain concentration, interest, motivation levels for longer periods of time. 94% say that breakfast allows pupils to settle into the day and start their learning promptly, so they're losing less learning time within the day. 88% of our schools say that collectively, all of us, we're helping to ease pressure on families at an unprecedented, it's an extremely challenging time for families. The vast majority of schools say that we are helping children and young people's health, the physical, mental health. We're educating about healthy eating habits. The DfE measure and publish data on attendance and punctuality. They really do have such an impact. And 78% say that they have seen an improvement in both these areas. Onto the next slide, please. So this impact shows that on Kyle, he's feeling much more positive about school. He's feeling he can go in and talk to his friends at breakfast club in different year groups. He has got stronger relationships with adults in the school. One of the first things that schools hear is that from families new to the school, they feel so welcomed because of breakfast, and then they build up friendships, both parents and children. Kyle's more positive towards school. He's more confident. He's kinder to others. He's happier. His mental health has improved. He's trying new foods. He's having a more nutritious start to the day. On to the next slide, please. Well, despite the many pulls that we've heard on school budgets, schools are ring-fencing Magic Breakfast support. They see the value both financially, so the food order is significantly subsidised, but most importantly, in other ways, on their entire school community, the added value that healthy breakfast provides to their work. On to the next slide, please. One of the reasons that we do collect such rich data from our schools is because we want to continuously improve. We're always wanting to do more and innovate. I'm on the innovation team, so I'm obviously biased in wanting to look for new ways of ensuring that we have the maximum impact for the children in our schools. Part of the M&M is to hold ourselves accountable. We know that school conditions change, and that's also part of the reason why we have engagement partners in place who work with our schools. We joke that our EPs put the magic into Magic Breakfast, but I'm being really serious here. I think that human support and the strong relationships that they forge with schools is critical. And this graph shows some of their impact. If they go into a school and they see food waste, then they work together with the school to make improvements. And you can see here that we don't have, our schools don't have much surplus food at all. In having to make efficiencies this year, we thought through how to improve our supply chain. And we use all the data that we collect to inform our decision making and then monitor those decisions going on. I'm going to read a quote on the next slide to just sum up what schools think of all of our support. Magic Breakfast makes such a difference. Previously disengaged pupils are now eager to come to school, knowing that the first thing that they will get on arrival is a warm, nutritious breakfast in a calm, caring atmosphere. Parents will call if their child is running late to check whether Magic Breakfast will still be available. And yes, of course, it always is. Pupils who found it difficult to access learning or to concentrate on the simplest of tasks due to hunger are now thriving, both physically and mentally. Magic Breakfast is just that, magic. Next slide, please. We always like to ask what else we can do to support our schools, and this year our brilliant partners have helped. Thank you. We're so grateful to all your support. I'd just like to give a particular shout out to Quaker and Weetabix, working closely with us to broaden the range of food on offer. We hear that schools want an increased offering, and while some products wouldn't be appropriate, we educate schools with our engagement partners around school food standards. So we explain why we can't provide juice due to the importance of looking after our children's dental health. But it's been really wonderful to hear how much schools value this provision and the broad nutritional range of foods. And while we can't add time to the school day, or we can't pay for staff to run the breakfast clubs, we can provide support and expertise and resources to enable schools to add value to their breakfast provision so that they can maximise that time and the opportunities for their children. On to the next slide, please. So Kyle's parents say that Breakfast Club has provided me with the opportunity to get back into work, as I was unable to get a job before due to starting work early and having to pay a childminder to have my son before school. I simply couldn't afford this. And we've heard this from many schools this year, that they're telling us that our Magic Breakfast support is allowing parents to get back into work and contribute to their local community economically. It's a fantastic impact. On to the next slide, please. So I'm going to finish with the child at risk of hunger with Kyle. We heard this sentiment echoed with all our other food products. What I really love here is the fact that we've got a teenager who's been so enthusiastic. This is the best on the planet. We really do make a difference. Thank you. Thank you, Lindsay.
Thank you, Catherine. And thank you, Kyle, as well, in terms of bringing to life, the impact and the need for Magic Breakfast. And as Catherine highlighted, I think, we really did see and feel and hear in every school visit the real difference and the real additionality of need that was happening in schools for children and young people, whether that was, an extra need for something warming, whether it was a bowl of porridge or some beans on toast or bagel. That variety of choice is something that we've been working very hard on, and I'm sure we'll be talking about in future Magic Mornings. So next we are going to hear from Ellie Liddle, who is a poverty proofing coordinator for children in the Northeast. So Ellie, I'll welcome you to the screen, please. Thank you. And please remember, attendees, to add your questions into the feature. I've seen one just come in. Brilliant. Thank you.
Hi everyone, I'm Ellie Liddle and I proudly work for Children Northeast on the Poverty Proofing the School Day team. Children Northeast recognises that growing up can be hard. Children Northeast has been around for 132 years and therefore is one of the longest running Northeast charities that empowers children and young people. As a poverty proofing coordinator, I work with schools and educational establishments up and down the country, listening to the voices and opinions of every child, supporting schools to remove barriers to learning and ensuring that every child can fully participate in every aspect of school life, no matter what their financial background is. I'm a qualified teacher with 17 years experience of secondary education, 4 of which were as a head of department. I've also been a skip tutor and I'm also a parent governor in a local primary school. So I have a really good understanding and appreciation of how schools work and the many challenges that they face. Next slide, please. Poverty Proofing the School Day is a programme that was developed in 2011 by Children Northeast. We consulted with children and young people through a photo consultation project. Children and young people were given disposable cameras and asked to take photographs of what poverty looks like to them in their area. The results were fascinating, and when the photos were printed, we returned to the groups to talk to the children and young people about the images that they had taken. The images brought out a wide range of different issues, including quality of housing, spaces to play, access to transport, access to shops, safety within community spaces, and a lack of community spaces. But the children and young people were clear. The place that they found most difficult and most different to their peers was at school. This wasn't necessarily what we'd expected or what was shown in the photographs, but it came through loud and clear from our discussions. What we found out is that too often our poorest students face unintentional stigma and discrimination, which means that they are not only identifiable to their peers, but also that they have a different experience of school. Next slide, please. One of our most popular pieces of work that we do to support schools is a poverty proofing audit. With this, we look at 14 different areas within the school day. For example, uniform, food, charity and fundraising, celebrations, resources, and additional opportunities, so trips and clubs. And if there is a cost related to it, and how that could be a barrier for some children to fully participate. We are always considering what it must feel like to be the poorest child in the school. Do they feel like they belong? We work with primary schools, secondary schools, colleges and sixth forms, and teacher training providers. We also offer tailored and bespoke audits, staff training, and PSHE workshops for pupils and students. In an audit, we talk to every single child because every voice is important and every child has the right to be heard. So, for example, we ask children about resources. Do all children have everything they need for the school day in order for them to learn? Or do they have to provide their own equipment? What happens if a child doesn't bring a pen to school? Do they get a detention? And how does that make them feel? Charity and fundraising. Can all children buy a cake at the cake sale? Do they have the correct colour clothes for colour day? Or does their family feel that they need to go out and buy something new? How many families buy new pyjamas for pyjama day because they can't possibly send their child in their old washed out pyjamas? How is money collected in? Is it obvious that someone hasn't contributed? And do children have to contribute to take part? Transport. How do children get to school? Are they all entitled to a bus pass, or do they have to pay because they live just inside the 3-mile radius? Or if they stay back for an after-school club, does that mean that they can't get the bus home using their pass? Can they cycle to school, or did they miss out on the bike ability in primary school because they didn't have a roadworthy bike, or even just a bike or a helmet, and therefore couldn't participate, and now still don't know how to ride a bike? Homework. How do children access homework? Is it online? Do they have ICT available at home or internet access? Do they get into trouble for not completing it or miss their golden time? Perhaps they don't have support at home to complete their homework or space to do it. Are there rewards for completing homework? Do all pupils have the same resources at home to make that amazing castle? Behaviour rewards and attendance. Are children rewarded for 100% attendance? How achievable is that for someone who lives in poverty and doesn't have access to healthy, nutritious food or even a bed to sleep in? Celebrations. How are birthdays celebrated in schools? Do children bring in sweets on their birthday for the rest of the class? How does that feel for the child who can't afford to bring in sweets for their peers? Is there a Christmas jumper day? What if you haven't got a Christmas jumper? Do families feel like they've got to go out and buy a new jumper because they don't want their child to miss out? Do children have to bring in food for their Christmas party or wear their party clothes? Not everyone has party clothes. Next slide, please. So what are we seeing in schools? The quotes on this slide are all real quotes from parents and students and children that we have spoken to in the past year. What are we seeing in schools and what is the impact of the cost of living crisis? There are 4.2 million children in the UK living in poverty. 71% of children who were in poverty after housing costs and 67% of those who were in poverty before housing costs were in a family where at least one adult was working. The areas that we tend find that come up the most in schools at the moment and have the biggest impact on children at the moment are food, uniform, and additional opportunities. What is important to remember is that many of these issues that are coming up and that we come across have always been there, but they have now been made worse by the rising cost of living crisis, making it more difficult for more children to participate fully in their school life. So when we're talking to children recently and we're talking about food and free school meals, we are hearing from children that they are hungry when they come to school. They haven't had breakfast, and for some, they won't have eaten a meal since their lunch the previous day. Many families are in debt with school lunches. We're currently hearing from many children in secondary schools primarily that have to put food back because there's not enough money on their account. Imagine how degrading and how embarrassing that must be for the child, and then they can't even get anything to eat. There's many children on packed lunches now because the rising cost of living, and it's cheaper for parents and families to make packed lunches. But what we're finding is that nobody is checking what's in those packed lunches. So it's very easy for families not to put much in a packed lunch and it be hidden. Some children don't eat anything at lunchtime, and that's because they can't afford it or they're not eligible for free school meals, and they don't want other people to know that they're on free school meals. We worked in a school last year where the school were just trying their best. They were just trying to make sure that those children on free school meals knew what they were able to have as part of their free school meal allowance, what they could afford. And what they did was they put blue stickers on all the food that was free school meal food. But all that did was highlight to everybody else those children that were on free school meals. So those children did not take up their free school meal allowance because they did not want to be seen as being poor. Uniform, it's expensive, and not all schools follow the government guidelines on making school uniform affordable. Secondary school uniform is especially expensive, with many having blazers and a logo on everything: skirts, trousers, PE uniform. Families don't always know that schools can support families with uniform. One of the very first schools I worked in an audit was around Christmas time a couple of years ago, and I was just talking to a young girl. It was the end of the week, it was the end of the audit. I thought I'd got all the information that I needed, and she mentioned that she'd asked her dad for a pair of school trousers for Christmas. And when I asked her why, she said, well, because the zip on it's broken, so I'm having to safety pin it together. And my dad can't afford to buy me trousers, new school trousers, so I'm just going to ask them for Christmas. She had no idea that the school could support her with a new pair of school trousers. Yet when I spoke to the school, they said that everybody knew that there was support with uniform. So there was just that lack of communication, and we find that often that is the case. Schools are seeing more children coming in with dirty, damaged clothes. And for some families, it's just too expensive to wash and dry them because of the rise in gas and electricity bills, or it's too expensive to buy new. And there's also a stigma around pre-loved uniform, or schools don't just offer it. Additional opportunities. Not all families can afford to send their children on trips. Often schools will ask for a voluntary contribution to the cost of a trip, but this can make families feel guilty or worry that if they don't pay, their child will miss out or be treated differently. Letters sent home about trips do not include details of the support that schools might be able to offer. Clubs and trips are often provided on a first-come, first-served basis, and not everybody has spare cash to pay a deposit straight away. And often trips and clubs have other hidden equipment costs. As I said earlier, what is important to remember is that many of these issues have always been there, but they've been exacerbated by the rising cost of living crisis, making it more difficult for more children to participate fully in their school life. Next slide, please. So our poverty proofing ethos is that no activity or planned activity in school should identify, exclude, treat differently, or make assumptions about those children whose household income or resources are lower than others. We're not the fun police. We aren't saying don't do things. We are just another pair of eyes to help schools think of other ways of doing things, to help make cost-neutral decisions so that every child can participate. Every young person should have the opportunity to fulfill their potential, regardless of their background or the disadvantages that they may face. Next slide, please. After an audit, we work with schools to discuss what they are doing well, and we know that schools are doing things well. But we also discuss what we have seen and heard and offer practical solutions and suggestions as to what and how things could be done differently. Schools are taking on board what we say and making positive changes. And please feel free to have a look at our website and social media platforms to see some case studies. I've got the details of those on my very last slide. All of our team have experience of working in schools, so we understand the pressures that schools are under. Schools are taking on board what we say and are making positive changes. They are making poverty proofing part of their ethos, which is fantastic. We know that schools can't do it alone. Supporting children who live in poverty is about everybody working together. Teachers, SLT, governors, local businesses, teacher training providers, local councils, policymakers, and families all communicating with each other. Next slide, please. So is there light at the end of the tunnel? Yes, we think so. There is good news. Poverty is policy responsive, and whilst schools may not be able to make all the difference, they can certainly make a difference, a very important difference. Next slide, please. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ellie. And I think it's, just so helpful to understand the context that breakfast is provided in, building on what Catherine shared about Kyle's start to the day. So thank you for that. And now to go to our final speaker, we have Gareth Nation, who is the head of Minerva Primary School in Somerset. They are Magic Breakfast partner school, and we are incredibly grateful to Gareth, his colleagues, and colleagues across the country who every single morning ensure that there is a magic breakfast for children like Kyle. So Gareth, welcome this morning.
Hi, everybody. Thank you very much for having me here, and for so many people attending and listening. My goodness, Catherine and Ellie, there was so much, almost feel like I need a separate conversation with each of you after. There was so much that resonated in what you said. And kind of echoes that I see in school on a day-to-day basis. Whether it was Ellie talking about the lack of food, the lack of uniform, the lack of opportunities for children from disadvantaged backgrounds and so forth. Whether it's Catherine, there was so much in what you said, but I'd like people just to hold on to one quote that was on one of the first slides that Catherine shared, which was a child from Southwark said, "One big family that eats together." For me to talk about the impact that Magic Breakfast has at Minerva Primary School, I have to kind of start with the big picture, I'm afraid, of who we are. So you have some kind of context, rationale and understanding, because it's a bit like they use the analogy of a pebble dropping in a pond, and the ripples and the waves that are sent out from that. The difference that Magic Breakfast makes impacts so many different areas of Minerva Primary School. So I'm going to give you a little bit of context to explain this picture that you see in front of you now. Everything that we do at Minerva Primary School is based on a set of foundations, which is about collaboration, courage and compassion, and we're all aiming for excellence. The three columns that hold up that kind of mission statement of making everything possible is ensuring that we provide the children with an exciting curriculum, that we think about and take care of their emotional health, well-being, and obviously teaching and learning. So it's so much more than just the teaching and learning that takes place on a day-to-day basis. Minerva Primary School is in the top 5% of the most deprived in the country. It's the most deprived primary school in Somerset, and it is a mainstream school, but I tend to think of Minerva Primary School as a bit of a hybrid school in terms of we have our percentage of children that are on the SEN register is way above the national average. We have 46%. We have 52% of pupil premium, children that access pupil premium grant. And there are only 10% of the children in school who have no ACEs, so that's adverse childhood experiences. There's a significant percentage of children that have 4 or more, and then large percentages of children that have 3 and 2, and so forth. So significant challenges that are faced within the children, for the children, the community that we serve. And you can see on this diagram in front of you here, which explains the gap and how that gap grows between advantaged and disadvantaged. It'd be worth noting that when I talk about disadvantage, this is formally recognised disadvantage. We also recognise that there are a greater proportion of children at this school that are disadvantaged under what we term as disadvantaged, and that links to the ACEs and so forth that I talked about just now. So we use research to inform a lot of what we do and the understanding of the impact that this has on children and their families' lives. Much like what Ellie was talking about with the images that she'd captured, which is a lovely way of capturing the children's voice, but this is all about how does this make the children feel. And the school is knocking on the door of achieving its trauma-informed status. Every member of staff, from the staff that clean the school, the staff that work in the lunch hall, to the senior leadership team, and everybody that attends the school, it's important that they understand the trauma-informed approach and are able to help regulate children and get down to their level, if you like. So the picture gets even bleaker. There's, as if it's not a bad enough picture already, we understand that people living in the most deprived 10% of areas will die 9 years younger than those in the richest 10%. And that says it all, really. If that doesn't make you get out of bed in the morning, come into school, make a difference for these amazing children, then I don't know what will. And essentially what we're saying is, again, linking to what Ali was talking about, those opportunities and experience that children don't have, we're sorry, but your dreams have kind of been cancelled. And for me, that social contract is broken at the moment, beyond the kind of bigger picture of schools, if you like. There's an interesting activity that you can do with people from disadvantaged backgrounds, and you talk about the word failure, and you don't have to do this now. I don't think we have time to do it now, but if you think of the word failure, just write down 3 words that come to you, and the words that you write down will often be negative words, or people from disadvantaged backgrounds would often be kind of negative words and so forth, as opposed to thinking of failure as a learning opportunity. So it's about having staff understanding that mindset of children that come to Minerva Primary School from disadvantaged backgrounds, and where their starting points are, if you like. So I talked a little bit about that social contract being broken, and Catherine nodded to this as well, that the need is increasing significantly across the country, and the need in the community that we serve has increased exponentially in the past couple of years, but particularly in the past kind of 12 months, the cost of living and so forth, there's a significant challenge there for families, and the services that are available to us are reducing as well. Okay, so it's quite a bleak picture, but the light at the tunnel that Ellie referred to, and not all hope is lost. The word love isn't often used in schools very much, particularly by leaders, and I've always struggled with that. It's a word that we shy away from. But this is a book from Coco Mellors, Cleopatra and Frankenstein, and it kind of summarizes that understanding that actually we have to fiercely love to make a difference. And that's okay. That's okay to fiercely love in order to make a difference. We recognise that parents and children living in poverty have the same aspirations as those who are better off. And this is something that I shared with the team at the start of this academic year. And we had a long kind of conversation over this in terms of, do they, the evidence suggests that they do. Do they have the same aspirations? Do they have the same hopes and dreams for their children? And the research is overwhelming that they do. And of course, that's something that you can work with, and that's an understanding that we are part of the children's journey, and the community that we serve, we're part of that journey to help them achieve whatever they want to achieve, and taking it back to our vision of making anything possible. And we focus on constant improvement at the school. Okay, so I've kind of set the context a little bit, and going back to the quote that I talked about at the start from Catherine's slide, one big family that eats together. What the thing that makes a difference in terms of addressing disadvantages is everybody feeling that they have meaningful participation. And I would argue that's not just addressing the disadvantages, that's for anybody. That you feel that you belong, you have that psychological security, and you feel that you belong somewhere, and that you are somebody in that organization or that family, if you like, that is going to make a difference, and you contribute in some way, shape, or form. Without Magic Breakfast, not only could we not afford to feed the children breakfast when they come into school, the ripples are huge. So we use Magic Breakfast to target key families. We provide it as a provision that's available for everybody, but we target key families, and that could be something to do with punctuality, attendance, families that we know have access to grant, for example, for school uniform, and therefore we know that they're struggling to afford to feed the children because of the cost of living crisis, and so on and so forth. And it's making a huge difference. So I'm going to throw some stats your way. Catherine nodded to a few attendance figures as well, but if I just give you a few examples from last academic year. So we had one child in the autumn term with attendance of 78%. They weren't accessing Breakfast Club. They never had done. That child was in year 3. And so we provided that provision for that child. They are now, they ended their year at 94%. We had another child at 64% who ended the summer term at 89%, and another child at 87% who ended the term at the end of the year at 97%. So that's just some example of the kind of the hard data, if you like, and the difference that it makes to our children. Not only that, there was a child, the biggest kind of driver for the punctuality, and I think it was Catherine or Ellie said about, you welcome children in earlier, even though they're arriving late, and it makes a real difference. We had a child that was in the autumn term, had 2 hours of lateness, if you like, over the autumn term, and that gradually diminished so that in the summer term they were on time every single day, and that was down to providing that free breakfast for that child. Another child that was 58 minutes late over the autumn term, and they only had 5 minutes late in the summer term. So it's a significant difference to their attendance, their punctuality, the financial impact that this has on, or the support that it provides for the school. Without Magic Breakfast, we genuinely would not be able to provide this. We would have to find some way in order to do it because of the benefits of Magic Breakfast. But if we didn't provide it, there would be huge repercussions from doing that. So we'd have to pull on another resource in order to make it happen. I've talked about the ACEs at Minerva Primary School, and there's a significant, so we have 3 DSLs and a designated safeguarding officer full-time as well, which gives you some indication of the level of safeguarding issues that we have at the school. But having a breakfast club where children come in, so nearly half of the school attend the breakfast club. Children come in, they access, we have a dental or oral hygiene program. We have the Breakfast Club running, obviously. We have a sports initiative that's running at the same time. We have a homework club running at the same time. We have the library open at the same time. And we staff that so that it's an opportunity for children to come in and have a very much kind of home from home vibe. But that allows us, in terms of the trauma-informed approach, building those relationships with the children and really starting to connect and build those relationships in order so they have that psychological safety and share. So a lot of the safeguarding concerns and cause for concerns that crop up, a significant proportion of those come out during that time. And that is absolutely critical to us having that early intervention and early support, and whether it's preventative or reactive, etc. I talked a little bit about the attendance. So what we offer at the school is a holistic education. The breakfast club provision, the games, the sports, the library area, the homework, the oral hygiene program, and all of that builds a picture that this is about education. And when a head teacher says education, people often think reading, writing and maths. It's not that. It's about educating the whole child. And actually that's not enough now for schools. We have to go beyond the school gates. We have to reach out to our community. We are so much more than people that just teach the children the national curriculum. And that's okay. That's our job. People like Magic Breakfast and the provision that we can offer our children because of that is absolutely fundamental to everything that we do. So I think my time is up. I could waffle all morning, but thank you very much for listening. Thank you to Ellie and Catherine as well. It was fascinating. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Gareth. I think I could sit and ask you a list of questions as well. And I've been furiously scribbling notes because we are also in political party conferences, and I'm sure everyone has noticed. And I spent Monday morning on a panel with the Secretary of State speaking about attendance and how breakfast provision can support that. And on Monday afternoon, I'll be speaking with Labour's shadow team about exactly the same topic. And interestingly, the subject for the panel discussion is beyond the school gates and looking at how we remove barriers to education. So I think there will be some brilliant bringing to life of some of the impact and the examples and the need for government support for school breakfast clubs and many of the things that Ellie touched on from your presentation as well. So thank you all. I know we've had some questions coming in, so thank you as well to the attendees, and I will start by going in order, if that's all right. Hopefully our speakers can also see the questions, so you can take a moment to look at what's coming. So Ellie, could you just tell us a bit about whether you find the schools, and I'm guessing this is framed in the context of the cost of living crisis and rising need, do you find that schools are more aware of the need in their communities, and are they putting provision in place to help those children and families who may not necessarily be able to afford certain activities or trips?
Absolutely. Schools are brilliant, and they do so much. And I think often families rely on schools. They rely on the support of schools. You know, it's another emergency service, and we definitely saw that over COVID. They're aware of what their communities need. I think sometimes those schools don't always know all their families. So they'll say that they do, but if you live in poverty, you will do whatever you can to make sure that nobody knows. So schools know their pupil premium children. They might know sort of historically children that, you know, families historically, but there's no way that they can know everybody. So what we kind of say is just make sure that that families, that your school community know all the support that you can offer. Often we'll say, you know, to schools, have a email address that that it doesn't have somebody's name linked to it, so support at such and such a school, so that parents, families know that they can contact the school and somebody will pick up that information. And it'll be dealt with, but then it takes the stigma away from it as well, and it takes that embarrassment away from it. But schools are doing a lot. We talk to schools regularly, that work with their communities, work with local businesses, to help support families that way. There's community centres that have pre-loved uniform provision. So again, your families aren't going into school and can't be seen by other families collecting pre-loved uniform, but they can go to a community centre where everybody else feels the same, or there might be a food bank in the community centre as well. So yes, definitely.
Brilliant. Thank you, Ellie. And Gareth, there's a question for you asking if you could say a little bit more about adverse childhood experiences, ACEs, which you referenced. But I wonder if you could maybe start by adding to a question that was posed to Ellie in terms of examples that you might be able to share from Minerva.
Yeah, could we, Lindsay, could you just go back to the question? It's just disappeared.
Yes,
just
sorry.
The question, so I get to the root of.
Yes, it was, are you more aware of the need in your community, and are you putting more provisions in place in terms of supporting those children and families who may not be able to afford certain activities?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. So Ellie's right in terms of the challenges that schools face in terms of knowing, really knowing those families and what those families need. The advantage, I guess, that we have at Minerva, if I was talking selfishly from my school, is it's a fairly, it's 300 pupils. It's not a massive school, but it's big enough. And things like the full-time designated safeguarding officer that we have, all the children when they join the school have a home visit, for example. So whether that's mobility in year, whether that's when they join in reception, they have a home visit. So we get to see the families in their home environment, and it all comes back to building relationships for me, I guess. And when I've been at this school for 2 years, I don't want to go off piece too much, but I've been at the school for this is my 3rd year now. And you'll note that I'm not wearing a tie, I'm wearing a suit jacket. The suit jacket is new. Before I joined Minerva, I used to be suited and booted, but the perception from parents was, I don't want to say a young chap because I'm not a young chap anymore, but a chap in a suit and they just couldn't relate, and that's okay. But it's about building those relationships. I think I don't want to go off the question, Lindsay, but building those relationships and really getting in and getting to know the families. And the support that we provide. I love that turn of phrase, Ellie, about schools being, an emergency service, because it feels like that. I don't think I've contributed to Ellie's robust answer very much, but I'll move on to the ACEs one. How do we respond to the school's ACEs? So it's part of the kind of body of assessments that we do at the school is looking at children's adverse childhood experiences and understanding what they are. So looking at the root cause of the experience the child's had, and then looking at what reactive provision needs to be put in place to support the child. So depending on whether it's some form of neglect, some form of abuse and so forth, we look at making sure the correct professionals are working with the child, and then of course the family as well. So that's a kind of reactive measure to the children's ACEs. Of course, it's the whole school trauma-informed approach that I was talking about. That's why we've been on this journey for 2 years now, because it's not just calling in professionals, they'll wave a magic wand and they'll fix it. This is a consistent day in and day out approach for the child, but also for the families. So that's one measure. The other measure that we take is we work closely with the local, what's called the Link Centre, but they work with families in holiday time and so forth. So we provide free out-of-school provision in half terms and some holidays and so forth to support those families. And I'm crossing my fingers because we're just going through the second round of significant investment of money for. We have a mantra at the school where we say 2 years is 2 years too late. So we have a nursery where the children come in from 2 years up until 11 when they go on to their secondary school. But we are saying that 2 years is 2 years too late, because in those 2 years, they are the most crucial time in a child's development. And we've piloted a program last year to work with children and their families, where we invite mums to be, dads to be, parents to be, carers to be, whatever it might be in. So they might already have children, they might be planning to have children. They come into the nursery, they observe our trained professionals working with young children, singing nursery rhymes and, you know, so on and so forth. And we then help teach the parents as well, kind of the importance of that interaction. So it's about that preventative measure and getting in early on. I'll stop because I'll talk forever. I'm sorry, I've had a note to wrap up.
Don't share our secrets. But yes, no, I am conscious of the time, and I know that some of our attendees will have other commitments at 10 o'clock, and I wanted to make sure that as many people as possible heard my deep gratitude, thanks and appreciation on behalf of all of us who have been able to attend today, and on behalf of Magic Breakfast. Catherine, Gareth and Ellie, thank you so much for sharing your brilliant insights and stories, and also to the team behind the scenes at Magic Breakfast, Jenna and Hannah, who have been working away, making sure that everything runs smoothly. And as Catherine touched on, just a huge thank you to every single person on this call who contributes to the mission and work of Magic Breakfast and makes it a possibility in schools up and down the country like Minerva Primary. We are deeply, deeply grateful. I wish you all a very good rest of the day. I would ask that you complete our feedback survey, as I touched on, and that you have a lovely World Teachers Day and a wonderful, happy Census Day as well. So thank you all, and take very good care of yourselves. Thank you.